All right. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Mark Graban from KaiNexus, and we're joined by 4 KaiNexians, as you see here. We're going to let them all introduce themselves in a moment, but we are joined by Kim Guiliotti, Greg Jacobson, Maggie, Millard, and Linda Vicaro. Our format today is a panel discussion, no slides, just conversation. We have a plan. We've got some topics and questions that we're going to explore around learning from mistakes. The panel today is sort of a launch event for my new book, The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. It's available now. I want to announce our 3 book giveaway winners, as we've been doing with the webinars. Thank you to people for sharing about the webinar on LinkedIn. Our 3 winners this time are Richard Galinsky, Christine Thomas, and Liz Davis. So I will reach out to you and we'll get the signed copy of the book out to you. Just a couple other comments to tee up the conversation here today. The book is inspired in a way by a podcast I've been doing called My Favorite Mistake. Greg Jacobson here with us today was a guest in episode 31. And beyond that, in the exposure I have and the limited role I have in KaiNexus, I've observed and been directly involved in a culture of learning from mistakes, and one that emphasizes learning and improvement over shame and punishment. So ended up being a lot of great stories in the book, kind of highlighting the KaiNexus culture. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. What's being done to actively cultivate the culture, and hopefully some lessons that you can use in your workplace. So again, thank you everybody for being here today. Let's go around the horn and do some introductions, who you are, what you do at KaiNexus. Optional fun fact, if you're so inclined. Kim Guiliotti, we'll kick it off with you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Happy to be here. So Kim Guiliotti, I'm Director of Product here at KaiNexus. So I work extremely closely with our other product managers, our development team, and we are the ones who put out all of the fancy new features you guys see every 6 to 8 weeks. So spend a lot of time talking to customers, prospects, understanding the market, understanding everyone's needs and what goals they're trying to achieve. I've been in product management for well over a decade. And a fun fact, I've been watching the Women's World Cup. Hopefully a lot of you are very excited. I stayed up later than I should have last night watching the women's team play. And I'm also just a sports fan and really excited for the fall and college football to kick off.
All right. Well, thank you, Kim. And we always have attendees from a lot of different countries. We'd love to hear where you're from. If you want to put that in the chat, if that lines up with a Women's World Cup team or not, let us know where you're from. So next we'll go Greg Jacobson.
And here I was trying to figure out who won the game last night.
U.S. drew.
Okay. Wait, U.S. drew? It was a draw?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said U.S. and I was like, yes. So, well, happy to be here. I have a huge amount of experience with mistakes. And so thank you so much for inviting me to talk about all of them. I'm the CEO and co-founder. I am affectionately self-described as the great agitator of the group, and I mean that in a way of just always trying to get us to think about things and to bring in a different perspective, and really it stems from my value of trying to make everyone's potential the best that it can be. And so been working in continuous improvement probably for 18, 19, 20 years, somewhere in that realm. And as one of the 2 co-founders of KaiNexus, I've been here for quite some time. So fun fact is that I am working on a Pink Floyd solo on the guitar. And that was the first thing I thought of if you happen to be here during the sound check. We talked about Pink, but a different band. So that's me.
Yeah. Another fun fact about Greg on the podcast, I asked guests to tell me your favorite mistake, and Greg had 5. that's a record for the most mistakes shared. So
I'm a gunner.
Thank you for that, Greg. Overachiever on the podcast. All right. So thank you, Greg. Maggie Millard, we'll have you go next, please.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. I've been at KaiNexus since 2012, and this is the first time they've let me on a webinar. So hopefully I make it through the whole thing without saying anything embarrassing. I've been here for a long time in a variety of roles, most recently as a vice president and head of customer experience. So I work a lot with our teams that support customers, the account managers, training, support, solutions engineering. When our customers meet with our team, it's usually those people. Fun fact, I have 34 houseplants. I counted this morning, and now that I've learned how to propagate them, it's about to get a lot worse or better, depending on your perspective of houseplants.
Thanks, Maggie. I don't think it's a mistake to have you here today. You could prove us wrong, but thank you for...
It's good to take chances, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's a good, reasonable chance we're taking here today. And then next up, we have Linda Vicaro.
Hello, I'm Linda Vicaro. I have been here at KaiNexus for about a year and a half as a senior lean strategist. And what I do in that work is connect a lot with our customers, as well as prospective customers to a degree, making sure that the design of their KaiNexus instance aligns with the way that they're doing continuous improvement on the ground. I've been doing continuous improvement work for about 18 years. And so I have a fair bit of experience prior to coming here to KaiNexus. One fun fact is that in addition to being a KaiNexian, I am a sometimes balloon artist. Mm-hmm. Another fun fact is that I am in Pittsburgh, not Texas.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite balloon animal to make, Linda? Additional tidbit on top of a fun fact?
Yeah, I like making giraffes.
Very cool. And Linda has shown off that talent at various company events. So we'll look forward to more balloon animals from Linda. And then real briefly, I'll maybe follow a similar format here. Mark Graban, Senior Advisor with KaiNexus. I've been involved with KaiNexus in different ways going back to 2011 when I got introduced to Greg and Matt. The co-founders, I manage the webinar series. I have, as I describe it, kind of a very part-time role with KaiNexus, but like a full belief in the mission and the software and the team. So I am thrilled, as always, to be part of the KaiNexus team. And I'm thrilled that we're here today to talk about something that's important to all of us, and that is culture and leadership and what we are trying to do within KaiNexus. So I'm going to throw a question, and we're going to have some, I think, opportunity for fairly freewheeling discussion here today. But I'm going to start off with a question directed to Greg, and then others can, of course, chime in. But Greg, for my book, Beyond the Podcast Interview, you shared some additional thoughts with me. And one thing really stood out, and this is in the book. You can't have a culture of continuous improvement without learning from mistakes. So I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate on that. And I don't disagree with you, but why do you believe that to be true?
Well, I always love that you find things that I say where I'm like, oh, I said that? That sounds really
Yeah, I have the recording.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I think if you break down lean continuous improvement into kind of its most basic form, in many variations of that, you're going to find that you could look at waste as a mistake, right? You could look at a defect as a mistake. And so if you kind of recognize that, then you are really recognizing that there's simply the potential for there being a better end state. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you can either think of, oh, well, I'm going to invent all these just brilliant ways to do things better, or you're going to do what most of us do and go look at where are all the low-hanging fruit, where are the areas of waste, where are the defects, or where simply are mistakes happening. And so I think it's kind of a shortcut for individuals to get right down to what is a way that I can improve in a value add way. So if you can open yourself up, open your team up, open your company up to saying mistakes are not a bad thing, but mistakes are opportunities for learning, then I think you have maybe made the single most important step in developing a culture of continuous improvement, which I'll define simply as every single person in the organization improving every day. And so I think I hadn't thought about mistakes until I started listening to your podcast, and then I'm really looking forward to you've actually put out an audio version, or at least you've given me a pre-audio version. So soon there will be a formal audio version of the book. Yeah, and in reading the chapters in which you were highlighting some KaiNexus stories. So thank you for bringing it to the CI community, that this is a really easy what's the word I'm looking for? Instead of it being, about Japanese words and tools and, and what is the word I'm looking for, Mark?
Mainstream?
Yeah, like a more mainstream way to talk about lean concepts. And I think that's going to be a huge, and it's happening. You can't go read popular books today without there being lean stories infused. And I think that that's happening. And I know I'm changing the subject and talking a little bit too long, and I'll pass that back to you. But it's happening where lean is just becoming part of the way business is done. Mm-hmm. And part of that is just using the vernacular that we all use in an everyday way. And mistakes is one of those.
Yeah, and I think mistakes are just one driver of opportunities for improvement, but it's a pathway, and I think it's one that, if ignored or stifled, it's going to hold us back.
I think too that if you're asking people to improve, you're asking them to make mistakes. When someone goes out on a limb to try something a new way, there's a chance that they're going to fail. And if you want them to improve, you have to give them the freedom to fail and to know that it will be okay if they do.
Yeah. Can anyone think of some examples of, as we drive a lot of improvements internally and continue innovating, an example in the context of, a software company like KaiNexus of, freedom to fail and learning from it?
I've got lots of examples.
Go ahead.
So, working specifically in product development, when we're putting out features and enhancements in the software to our customers, what we build, we're essentially building with the information that we have at the time. And I don't know that we ever get anything perfect. I doubt we ever have gotten anything perfect the first time it goes out. But that's the beauty of agile development, which, we're an agile shop at KaiNexus, is that you get it out there again with the best. You created something with the best information you have at the time, and then you start getting feedback. So we're constantly getting feedback about how we could tweak this to make this better, or if we could do this over here, more people would be able to use it for another use case. So we're constantly receiving feedback on how we could make our product and the features we release better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's this range of possible mistakes. It could be a mistake in understanding customer needs. It could be a mistake in execution. And there's opportunities. I mean, there are processes. Maybe you can touch on real quickly, kind of some of the processes for people who don't know how a software development company works or what an agile process is. I mean, there are attempts to catch those mistakes if they're made at different points along the way before it reaches the customer. Could you share a little bit about that, Kim?
Yes. This is jumping ahead, but this is going to get into your psychological safety.
Oh, that's all right.
We'll talk about. But there are so many checks along the way. The team that's working on, excuse me, let's just say like one user story. So one feature that we're going to put into a release. The product manager has meetings with customers, prospects, our customer experience team internally to gather as much information as we can. We create a mock-up, we write the story, we take that to the developers. Right away, we're getting feedback from the developers on whether things are unclear, whether things are missing. Could something be worded better? Did we forget about this use case? So we're already getting feedback on things we may have missed or are incorrect. From there, the developer takes it and they actually start coding the feature. And once the feature is coded, they do what we call a pull request. So every other developer on the team actually goes through and kind of proofreads, does like a code review and looks over their code and then makes suggestions of, hey, did you think about doing it this way instead? Or if you did it this way, you could have a performance improvement. So they go through that process. Then after it's pull requested and everyone's done their review, then it goes to our QA team, and they're the ones that test the feature. Does it work? Does it, the product manager said it has to do X, Y, Z things. Does it do all those? When we released the new code into the platform, did it break anything else downstream? And then if it did, then the mistakes they're catching are, we call them testing defects. Those go back to the developer to fix. So everybody is constantly reviewing everyone else's work. So there's a lot of trust and psychological safety involved there throughout that whole process.
Mm-hmm. And then, Maggie, with the teams you lead, customer facing in different ways, like, do you have some thoughts on like some of that feedback cycle, if you will, if something does reach a customer or if there's something that they think is a mistake, what happens then?
When the product defects make it to customers?
Yeah. Or if something's just confusing even.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of that is just communicating with the customers about like what they understand the problem to be. Sometimes it's a product defect. Sometimes it's user error, misunderstanding how something should work. And so I think the key is to get curious and figure out what happened, how it happened. We are on the side of over communication. So both internally and with customers, making sure that everybody is on the same page.
Yeah. And getting curious it seems like a good habit. For the Ted Lasso fans in the room, there's a famous scene in season 1 where Ted Lasso, I think, quotes Walt Whitman, which may or may not be a mistake, but the quote is great of be curious, not judgmental. And I think, that applies to different situations where if something has gone wrong, being judgmental leads to a lot of dysfunction. Being curious and focused on learning and improving, puts us in a better direction. So it's great to hear being curious as a habit.
I think that curiosity and acceptance of problems really comes through on the internal processes at KaiNexus too. I know I have made mistakes with the best intentions and nobody ever questions, whether I had good intentions or not. Even when it results in extra work for somebody else, they just jump right in and work to solve the problem with me. And then we identify opportunities to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about intent, just real quick. I mean, there's a phrase that you see used a lot of people will describe an unintended mistake. And I'm like, well, that's redundant, right? I mean, they're all unintended. We think we're doing something that's the right thing to do. And then we learn at some point, maybe it wasn't. But Maggie, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that there's so much trust in that to know that you can make a mistake and to know that your team will rally behind you. We talk a lot about focusing on the processes, not people. Mm-hmm. And when something goes wrong, we trust that the person has the best intentions, that everyone is doing their best work and trying as hard as they can. And so if a mistake was made, we get curious and we ask questions about how did this happen? Like, what was the circumstances that led to this? What process problem do we need to fix? Is it reminders for something or follow up on something or documentation? Recognizing that if someone is trying their best and if they're making a mistake, there's a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the why questions, as we hear so much about in lean or lean startup or other settings, I mean, tone matters, right? I mean, it can be asked in a curious way, like, well, why could that have happened versus why'd you do that? I mean, those whys are not the same, I would say.
I'll share a trick that I got from Greg. I hadn't heard it till I joined the organization here, but we try not to ask why. We try to turn that into a what or a how question, because why can elicit feelings of like defensiveness and you did something wrong. So that's something that we're like the product organization or KaiNexus as a whole, as we're talking to people and trying to get curious, trying to kind of flip that line of questioning on its head.
Yeah. What led you
to tell my toddler that? I'd really appreciate it.
Greg?
Kim, what led you to tell that story at that time?
Demonstrating that.
I couldn't help myself.
Demonstrating. Yeah, right. Well, Mark asking why, it tripped my, just triggered that story in my head. And then I was trying to relate it to Maggie's, we blame processes, not people, but I couldn't do it fast enough. So I'm not blaming you, Mark.
No, I'm not taking it that way. But I think some of it has to do with context and culture. Like when I think people know there's trust and mutual respect and constructive responses to things, language, might not come across as blamey or critical. Like, well, why did that happen? Where in some workplaces, though, you might have to be really super sensitive to the environment and what people have been experiencing. So it's one of those things where what works in one place, whether that's Toyota or someplace else, might not land the same way in your organization. But I mentioned Toyota, and Linda, I want to turn it to you. You have a lot of experience in different settings related to continuous improvement and lean. How would you describe elements of a culture of continuous improvement? We're going to talk about culture of learning from mistakes, but a culture of continuous improvement. How would you describe that?
Well, I think that Greg started to talk about this himself as well, but I really think that it comes back to people. And, like he said, it's really about every person working to improve every day. And I think that when you start there, you realize that there's a whole network of things that have to happen in order to make that possible. So if we want every person improving every day, then we need to make sure that we're creating a safe space for calling out problems, that when somebody says they did something wrong, that's a positive thing and not a negative thing. And I think that you have to keep in mind also that in continuous improvement, we're not always moving forward. Sometimes we have to take a step back in order to really move along on our path toward whatever our goal is. But overall, I think that it's rallying your people together towards a common goal on a daily basis.
So I'm curious, open question for anyone who'd like to chime in. Like, why is that important for a company like KaiNexus to have a culture of continuous improvement? Because Greg, my recollection, I think, is accurate. Going back to 2011, that was front of mind for you. KaiNexus was created and born from continuous improvement and to support continuous improvement. I know you and Matt, as the co-founders, certainly were working on that being, a culture within KaiNexus. But to Greg or to anyone else, how would you articulate the importance of a culture of continuous improvement?
I'm happy to jump in because you referenced me there. I'd love to say that it's because we want to be internally consistent, or as some people say, we want to eat our own dog food, which that expression has never made any sense to me. I'd also love it to say that, oh, well, this is kind of a principled, kind of almost an ethical, like there's a higher moral standing for it. But I mean, honestly, quite frankly, is that it just works, And so I think if something works, there's inherent value in that. And if you are in if you're in an environment or you're in a process that is not open to change or to getting better, I think that's a really boring, uninteresting way to live life. And I think that most likely that is going to at some point no longer be relevant. So it's a much more interesting way to live life, to constantly be kind of thinking through and how. Now, I will say there's probably several different axes to a thought process of how much you can iterate and experiment on. You have to look at what are the regulatory backgrounds. I mean, we're talking about making a medication, experimenting really quickly may not be the most beneficial. You're talking about changing a process in a line. There might be all these unintended consequences. There's going to be kind of what's the disadvantage of the impact of something going out? Can someone, be harmed? What is the cost of changing something up? Based on how many items would be produced or something. But at the end of the day, I don't care what industry you're in, these principles should apply in their own way. So that's kind of my thought. And I'm glad that you thought it was intentional, that we were going to live that life. And I think what I remember from those conversations back in 2011, Mark, was you said, "Oh, you're just a natural lean thinker." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." And there are people, I don't know if it's 10% of people or 50% of people or 90% of people at your organization, but there are people that just get these concepts and going out and finding those people, even if they don't have a continuous improvement title or they don't have any certifications, but finding those people and making them influencers in your area is going to help spread continuous improvement throughout your organization, whatever you're doing.
Yeah. But I think everyone has that ability, and most people have the desire. I think the problem is when organizations kind of tamp that down or stifle it, and people learn not to speak up about ideas. And
that might be a great question, because I mean, if you're a leader, and I would suspect that we have a sample bias here for people that are listening into this conversation. So you probably believe already that in continuous improvement, but let's say you are talking to a leader and you don't know where they stand. And quite frankly, if you spend, 90% of your time trying to influence the behaviors of your leaders, I think you're going to have more leverage and more impact in your organization, but that's probably a topic for a different discussion. But maybe simply asking them the question is, do you think mistakes are happening in the organization? And getting the answer, because if the answer is no, that's a very different set of follow-up questions of getting curious. And if the answer is yes, well, then that's also different. And, quite frankly, if I would tell a leader, if they don't think mistakes are happening, then they either aren't listening or they're not fostering a environment where people can tell you that there's mistakes happening. And I've worked in plenty of healthcare environments where it's the latter. And when mistakes happen, people just sweep those under the rug. They do all these gymnastics to make sure it's not reported or not looked at, because then there's an element of punishment that comes down versus, hey, wait, let's stop. This is an opportunity. So just some of the thoughts. I know we went in different directions. I'd love to hear what Maggie.
I'll take Greg's answer and bring it down to a more practical level.
I'm glad you felt psychologically safe to state it that way.
More tactically, Greg often says that the reason for our success is that we hire people to do jobs that are better at that job than we would be. And with the size of my team, if I were responsible for identifying opportunities for improvement in their work, we would fall flat on our faces. I have no idea what these people do all day. And so for them to feel comfortable identifying areas to improve their work, my job can be to help them realize those ideas rather than to come up with those ideas. And that automatically means we're going to be starting from a better place in improvement. So it's like it's warm and fuzzy, it's the right thing to do. But also practically, all of our processes will improve if the employees are the ones making the ideas and implementing those improvements.
Yeah. Now, one other thing, that I think is worth pointing out, as an observation is the onboarding process for new KaiNexians. And most recently, Keith, who's been hired into, an enterprise sales role. Hi, Keith, if you're watching or listening. As Keith, was describing last week when we were all together in Austin, that he was asked to point out opportunities for improvement in the onboarding process as he was going through the onboarding process, which I think is a really powerful practice. I was wondering if any of you could sort of, talk about the onboarding and some of that intent of trying to get people participating from the get-go.
Sure. We manage our employee onboarding in KaiNexus in a very long, very very long project. Every person who's gone through that project, we don't just ask them to help us improve it, we require them to help us improve it. It's a task that's assigned to them as part of that onboarding project, with the idea that when we started doing this project, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't really know how to onboard employees. And with each person that's gone through, it's gotten better. And so now we get feedback about how people felt so supported, and they knew exactly where to look for things, and they got all the training they needed. They knew what was expected of them. And that did not used to be the case. And the only reason that it is now is that every person who's gone through has helped make it better for the next person.
Mm-hmm.
I think onboarding is such a nice example of this, because there's almost no way for us to really understand what it's like to onboard with our company, because there's just so much that we understand and anticipate that we wouldn't be able to see some of the barriers that a new employee does.
And simple things like we use Gmail. If someone hasn't used Gmail before, there's a steep learning curve that we didn't know was a learning curve because we just use it. Mm. And so someone's onboarding improvement was detailing what we need to know about Gmail, linking to Google resources to be able to do them. And so now some employees will get that and they'll be like, check, I know how to use that. And others have the answers that they had no idea what to do. And from day one, they can effectively use their email.
Mm-hmm. So I'm getting really excited about this because there's several links to mistakes here, right? So yes, just to re-emphasize what Maggie's point was, if you asked us about our onboarding 7 or 8 years ago, I mean, it was correct. Like, it was just not good. It was piss poor. I'll just say that. And then if you look at it today, can I say that? I hope I can.
It's okay.
I think
mistakes are safe here.
Thank you. No, it was really bad. I'll just say that. And then this is the problem. You put an ER doctor on a thing and you're just going to go in a lot of different directions. And then you look at it today and we're getting great feedback about it because we really have made people responsible. But when we say we need you to improve this process in some way, one way is the person's using Gmail, for instance, and they make a mistake in Gmail because they didn't know about something. If we don't have a psychologically safe environment for them to be like, hey, I don't know how to use this, or I made a mistake, or then that kind of creates that opportunity. I think also, like Keith, he identified, we could say, a mistake in how we were doing some of our LinkedIn profiles. I'll just say that. And he made us way better in standardizing that process. So I think these are inextricably linked. You cannot have a culture that celebrates mistakes into opportunities without having a psychologically safe culture, without really, I'm going to say, making people responsible and making sure it's very clear that, the Toyota saying of you're here to do your work and you're here to improve your work. And like, those are both equally important. You may not do those 50% of the time. You might do 98% of the time, 2% of the time, but those are equally important things that you need to be touching on.
Yeah. That onboarding task is really the first time we ask someone to take the leap of faith with us. Mm. It's a low risk scenario where they can point out a problem with their new company, their new coworkers, their new boss, and they can make this small test, dip a toe into the water of our CI culture. It wasn't developed that way intentionally by any means, but we don't know where people have come from or what their backgrounds are, what their prior work cultures are like. And I think there's definitely an adjustment period for people coming to work here and recognizing that not only do we want you to speak up, we expect you to speak up. And I think starting out with that in their onboarding project sets that tone.
Yeah, Nancy posted a great point in the chat that I just wanted to highlight in case people aren't paying attention to the chat. But the value of having a fresh set of eyes on a process is so helpful, especially if you have people at a company who've been somewhere for a while. Everybody kind of gets tunnel vision, right? Like, this is the way we've done it. They don't think to necessarily question everything in which they could, whereas a fresh set of eyes, they might be questioning everything and trying to reevaluate everything. So thank you, Nancy, for putting that point in the chat.
I wanted to give a shout out to Keith, I think, as an example of, one of these kind of early observations and improvement opportunities where he and I had met on something related to LinkedIn. And part of the post-webinar workflow, and I'll invite everyone, please fill out the survey that you're prompted to fill out as you leave the webinar at the end, or I think it's sent to you in the follow-up email. Let us know your feedback about the webinars. And one of the questions we ask in that survey every time is, would you like to be contacted by KaiNexus about our software? We're not going to, reach out and bother people who are just enjoying the webinars. But if someone says, yeah, contact me, we have a process for following up. And that process has been very manual of me looking at a report, sending an email to Jeff Roussel, our chief revenue officer. And so for one, Keith had the improvement, for his role of like, well, let's start sending those now to Keith. I'm like, I'll try to remember. I'll try to make sure I don't forget. I'll try to make sure it's the standardized work. But then he had a better idea. He said, well, maybe we could automate that. And like, I know enough about HubSpot to go into the back end and look at the form, and boom, if someone checks yes, it's now an automated notification to Keith. Right. So now that takes me out of the loop. It prevents the risk of me missing one or forgetting to send it, or the hassle of sending it to the wrong person. So like that back and forth, like it wasn't because Keith has this requirement to participate. Like he had an idea, he shared it, and I didn't hit him with, well, no, that's too hard to set up, or, we haven't needed that. Like he had a great idea, and, we collaborated, and I think it was a good OI, and I documented it in KaiNexus. Is that eating our own dog food?
I've heard that the expression drinking your own champagne is another one.
Oh, that's better than Kool-Aid.
Probably. Yeah. And I was like, well, if you don't drink alcohol, that's not a good, we need a better expression.
Drinking the Kool-Aid is a really morbid reference.
Practice what we preach.
Practice what we preach. Yeah.
But as we, kind of shift and talk a little more about psychological safety, and I'll give a quick definition, and we'll hear thoughts from, the leaders in the group here. But I think an example, we come back to Gmail. There was a weekly KaiNexus call maybe 6 weeks ago where somebody shared with the entire group voluntarily of like, hey, here's a problem I had this week. I was waiting to hear back from a customer, or so they thought. Like, why haven't I gotten a reply? And if I remember right, their message was like caught in a drafts folder or some unsent state. And they noticed that, and they shared it with the team for the purposes of like, hey, everyone, I want you to be aware of this risk. Here's a mistake I made. And then Greg, I remember you chimed in and did two things. One was like the reassuring, well, hey, I've made that mistake too. And then here's the thing I've done to try to help prevent that from happening. So I think that was just a nice little moment of, demonstrating a constructive, positive response to a mistake that somebody shared. They didn't have to share that with the team. I'm glad that they did. So I don't know if anyone else has recollections of that little story or a different one that sort of illustrates the idea that we can share mistakes without fear of being ridiculed or punished.
I think it's really important to empathize with the person. And so I very much intentionally, one, because I've made every mistake that you can possibly make. And I keep trying to teach my 12-year-old daughter that the only reason I'm able to say anything is because I probably made a mistake about what I'm saying. But I think it's really important to empathize with the person and to kind of set that tone to say, one, dude, I've totally made that mistake. And then it's like, oh, thanks for sharing it. The benefit of that exchange is really for everyone else, for everyone else to go like, oh, that's cool. Like, all right, so I can tell about my mistake, and then I can make that a learning opportunity for people. And then I just happen also in that process tactically describe how I have created I probably have a little bit of ADHD traits. I didn't say I have ADHD. I use the word traits there. And so I'm not infrequently starting an email and then getting fragmented to somewhere else. So now I have a recurring task once a week to go through my drafts folder and look through those. So I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks about kind of that strategy.
I think what Greg just did is a really good example of how Greg leads our company well. I think our leadership team sets the baseline for the organization and what behavior is acceptable. And Greg is so good at pointing out his mistakes, talking about problems that he's had, kind of showing everyone if our CEO can do this, you can do this too. And that modeling is so important for an improvement culture. I think the other thing that we do that's really important is how we respond when mistakes are made and shared. And again, going back to Greg's point, we want people to know that it will be okay. We want them to speak up, to feel appreciated for speaking up. And the same goes with critical feedback. When I introduce a new process and my team pushes back on the process, that's exactly what I want to happen. And it's not enough for me to just not get mad that they pushed back. I need to follow up with thanking them and actively appreciating them going out on a limb and taking that risk. Because I throw harebrained ideas over the fence all the time, and I need them to push back with the limits of practicality. And the more we can do that, and the more we can do that in a group where I propose an idea and they push back, or someone brings a mistake to the table and it works out okay. The more we can do that, the more we build up that psychological safety and can really focus on improvement.
Yeah. So let me just share real quickly, at least a definition of psychological safety, and then one other thought to build upon what Maggie just shared. So, psychological safety can be defined as a social condition, or like a workplace where people feel safe to use their voice and to speak up, to do things like point out problems, admit mistakes, say, I don't know, share ideas for improvement without fear of punishment. And Matt, actually 2 points building on the great things you shared there, Maggie. Like, one is not just not punishing, but more actively thanking and rewarding and encouraging is really powerful. But then, you answered a question that Kim asked in the chat. If it's recognized that psychological safety doesn't exist, are there tips to how to start build the team together to build that? And you touched on the 2 key points. I'll credit Tim Clark in his book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. Leaders modeling, these behaviors that you want to see, and then rewarding others who follow their lead when they dip their toe in the water. I don't know, Linda or Kim, anything else that you would want to add about, psychological safety and things that leaders can do to encourage it, or times when you felt like you were being encouraged?
I would say, being another leader at KaiNexus, it made it a lot easier after I saw Greg and Jeff and Matt and like the other leaders modeling that behavior. It wasn't just one leader. We kind of had a critical mass, and then it catches on and everybody learns that that's okay. And it's not just one person from the top down, it's everybody from the top down displaying that behavior.
I think having leaders model is one thing, but also coming in as a new employee, seeing that the rest of the company follows suit and trusts that role modeling that the leaders have done is also really motivating. So those internal champions, I guess, or leaders who are not officially part of the leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
Well, everyone comes to us with different levels of psychological safety, and I would like to explain to them this is a very psychologically safe workspace, but I hear that doesn't work. And so constantly modeling these behaviors and rewarding these behaviors is going to build everyone up to that psychologically safe level that we need to be a continuous improvement company. Mm-hmm. And just recognizing not everyone is going to come in that way, and that's okay. And that's our mission, is to work with people, work with the culture to make everyone feel more safe.
We just had an example of this. We had our kind of in-person all hands meeting a week ago, 2 weeks ago. We were all down in Austin, and there was a big group of cross-functional people that came together, and we were tasked with trying to figure out, how can we improve our new customer onboarding? And we started that meeting. I forget if it was you, Stephanie, or if it was you, Linda, or if it was Stephanie, that kind of laid out the ground rules ahead of time. And it was we're going to highlight process, not people. We're going to assume everybody has the best intentions, right? We're trying to raise, how can we make this problem better? And so we had at the very beginning of that exercise, 5 or 10 minute kind of laying the ground rules to make sure, this is going to be we want this to be a psychologically safe place. Please raise those issues. So it was just a really good example of that coming together.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you can encourage and invite the speaking up, and then, and that's good. But then, like Maggie said, you can't just mandate this is safe, therefore you should feel safe. Like somebody has to learn and figure that out on their own through what they're seeing demonstrated and the interactions they're having with people. It really does.
We have to pull them into our psychologically safe culture. We can't push them into it.
Right.
I wish we could. It'd be faster.
Right. We can get certified as a safe. This room is a safe space. I'm like, it doesn't work that way either.
I'll just hang up some signs. That'll work great.
Remember, you're safe here now.
So there's so much amazing stuff going on in the chat. I just want to go back to a couple. So Jeffrey said that he brings his CFO, and I wanted to touch on that because there's so many elements of that are amazing. Because I can imagine you're doing a Gemba walk. I have no idea if the CFO he's bringing in understands the value of continuous improvement, doesn't understand the value of continuous improvement. But let's say if they do, that's great. If they don't, this could be a great way to introduce them to the types of things that can occur with continuous improvement. Let's say they do understand the value. It is showing a huge message to wherever they're doing the Gemba walk. The CFO is spending his or her time to do that activity. Huge. I think that I would make sure to coach the CFO that yes, they have fresh eyes, but to hold back on making recommendations versus getting super curious about different areas. And I think that'd be a super interesting. I could probably do an hour just on that of how do you ensure that CFO fosters curiosity and fosters a safe environment, because you're really trying to go to people in the Gemba and say, hey, what are issues you have? And then if a person's like, oh, well, why did you do it that way? Or, that could actually detract. Mark, you're going to say something.
Well, it's some of it's tone and some of it is positional power. So what might be legitimate curiosity can come across as threatening because I've seen a senior executive go to Gemba, hear people very proudly explain what they did to improve the process. And that executive asked in a pretty flat tone, well, why didn't you do such and such? And I think it was from creativity, but the way that landed was a criticism of you should have done such and such. And I think sometimes leaders run the risk of forgetting. They're like, well, I'm just a person. And yeah, they are. But once you get hierarchy and positional power, that can be inadvertently threatening.
So I just wanted to call that out. I think that's just awesome what Jeffrey's doing, and that's just super cool. And then there was a whole bunch more, and I'm going back and forth between not being able to see it, but there's a lot going on with psychological safety. And I was apparently chatting to the wrong group during this, and everyone felt Kim felt psychologically safe to tell me you need to change your settings. You're not chatting to the right people.
Oh, because there's a setting for chat with everyone versus chat with hosts and panelists. And there's another comment I'll read real quickly, and then we do have 2 questions from the audience. Heather said, our responses may vary based on the emotional state of the person sharing a mistake. If they feel terrible, they might just need empathy at the moment. It might not be the time to dig in the problem solving. And I'll tell you, that's something I've learned along the way of needing at times to take that pause, as Heather is describing here, at times saying, I'm really sorry that happened. And maybe even just leave it at that, and the thing I've seen and talked to people about with mistakes is that people generally feel bad that they quote unquote made a mistake, even if it was something very systemic in nature. And sometimes you need to give someone a little space to kind of get through that, to where now the problem solving part of our brain can be re-engaged. Make not months of space, but it might be an hour or a day, depending on the situation and the person. Respect that.
While we're hanging out in the comment section, I really liked Paul Vanderklee's question, how do you distinguish safe for mistakes versus accountability? I think that's a good point to call out, that safe for mistakes doesn't mean a lack of accountability. To me, the important thing is, how does the person respond to that mistake? Do they hide it? Do they cover it up? Do they accept responsibility for it? And can we work together to improve it? Is it a conversation that they're willing to engage in? Are they looking for process improvements? Are they open to process improvements? What can we do together to acknowledge the mistake that happened and move forward from the mistake together? And I think that's really key. Making mistakes, like, great, make mistakes, make all the mistakes you need to make in order to keep improving things. But the response to it is also important.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And also just getting curious about, well, how did the mistake happen? Like, did the person that made the mistake, were they not adequately supported? Is there something that we could do, education wise? Do they have too much on their plate? That is a big part of it, making sure that employees are adequately supported, and, everybody drops the ball now and then, right? It goes back to, what was the intention?
Mm-hmm. I think this is a dilemma that a lot of us in the continuous improvement field struggle with, though, is how do we accept that mistakes happen, that problems occur, and also hold people accountable to the standards that we've agreed upon. And I think that you are both hitting the nail on the head when you say that the key is that we talk about those mistakes, right? And so when something doesn't go as planned, when we take the time to say this problem happened, and then the next step to say, how did this happen, given that we have this standard that we thought was sufficient to make us successful? That's how we manage that accountability, making sure that we're using that opportunity to grow.
Mm-hmm. Such a nuanced question. I love it, because when we talk about a principle or a concept, we talk about it in almost binary ways, just so we can articulate what we're trying to articulate. And it obviously is going to lack a huge amount of nuance, right? I mean, this is a super nuanced question. And I think the things that I would be thinking about with regard to this is this the 8th time this person's made this mistake? And 100 people do this process, and this is the only person that makes this mistake? And then I would get into, well, at that point, it probably is not a process issue, but it may be a process issue for this person, because maybe they have a disability, maybe they lack critical judgment, maybe they have a different experience level. So, like, even though they're the only one out of 100 people, that could be the only one that made the mistake. There could still be reasons that it's still a process problem. But correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, that the 85-15 rule, it does account for that. Some of the time, it is a person that just made a mistake and did a problem, and there really wasn't an opportunity. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, there's this question of systemic causes of errors, and Dr. Deming. I mean, you throw around numbers like 93%, or we don't know the exact number, but I think directionally the point is a vast majority of problems have some sort of systemic cause. But I still think there's this question of, okay, well, what do we mean by accountability? I still think there's great risk in punishing an individual's mistake, because then that teaches people to not admit a mistake, right? So, like, one example, and I shared a little bit about this in the book, I mean, there's certain mistakes you try really hard to prevent, whether that's in the healthcare setting where Linda and Greg have worked a lot. I mean, there are certain mistakes that I think we could say in a non-judgmental way are preventable, and we should really prevent them because that mistake could be fatal to a patient. We're not going to view that kind of mistake the same as we would of, like, well, we tried a LinkedIn targeted marketing campaign and I think we wasted $500. Like, those are not mistakes that are created equally. But the question comes back to, what do we do in the aftermath of a mistake? And, there's just that old habit of, punitive responses that I would argue just ends up being counterproductive. If our goal is to reduce mistakes over time, I don't think punishment helps. It might.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Mark. It's completely so. Like after let's just say it's 93, whatever the number, you've decided that this was a person issue. What are you going to do about that? And I'm reminded by, and you know names better than I, but there was the nurse that lost her license. We participated in the panel.
Redonda Vaught.
Yeah, the fact that they went through and punished her in the way that they did, like invariably. Like there's just, it's really hard to make the jump that there will not be people hiding mistakes of huge caliber, because it was her that came up and said, wait a minute, I made a mistake. This happened. And when you look at the mistake she made, it was really clear that there were huge process elements with that, like not minor ones, but like huge ones. And then the fact that someone gets punished on that, I understand that the impact of the mistake was huge.
Right.
But you have to understand what that signals to the other, I don't know if there's a million nurses and, millions. How many millions of nurses and millions of doctors are going to be like, oh, so that's what happens if I talk about this mistake.
But bringing it back to KaiNexus, I sidetracked myself. The one example of doing the testing, the penetration testing to make sure that KaiNexus does not get hacked, and there is a lot of investment in testing of text messages, phone calls, emails, basically trying to trick people into giving up a password or access to something. And as I shared in the book, the example of telling people, if you think you've clicked on something, you will not be punished for telling us, because if it was actually an attack, the impact of that is going to be far worse by not saying anything. It doesn't mean there's no accountability or we don't care, right? I don't. These are kind of nuanced situations, but we're running out of time for nuance. But go ahead, Maggie.
I clicked the link. It was me.
Why'd you do that? No,
I clicked the link. I immediately figured out what I did and I reported it. And this is like a recurring example we talk about all the time. And I like to think that people knowing that I'm the one that clicked the link and then that I reported the link, and this is a thing that we all talk about, hopefully contributes to the psychological safety of the next person who gets tricked by emails from their COO linking to Google documents.
It wasn't Greg asking you for Apple gift cards.
That one's too obvious. I never trust emails from Matt Palulis anymore. I never open his emails.
The text message that's signed, "Sincerely, Gregory H. Jacobson." That's not a tip-off. All right. Well, shoot, we are almost out of time. There's a question from Emily to summarize it. What do we do at KaiNexus to help create space and time for people to participate in improvement? It's one thing to collect ideas, but are there certain practices to help people have time for action?
Well, that's tricky because I feel like it's such a core job responsibility. Like it's not something that I set aside separate time for. It's you're working on a project. Part of working on that project is improving it. So whatever time they're working on the project, the improvement's just baked into it.
I think we integrate into the course of our work a lot of opportunities to capture problems, even if you can't do the improvement in that moment. So we, have some shared task lists where we can jot down our ideas or problems for the time being until we're able to come together as a team and figure out what the next steps for them are. And we make space at our regular company-wide meetings too.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think we have, because we're a startup and because we are constantly solving new problems, we're expanding our product, we're changing internal processes, we have a bigger team. It's truly just built into everything that we do. I think the challenging thing would be is if you were in a different kind of environment where the distinguishing act of are you doing value add work or are you doing improvement work is going to be further differentiated. And so it's going to have to be disciplined. I just don't know how else you could do it other than literally taking someone out of what they're doing or just saying pause. You don't need to make more widgets or do more whatever you need to do, but like we need to set aside some time to do improvement work. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that.
Okay. And there were a couple other. There was one other question. There was another question from Al in the chat. We're out of time here, but we can commit to following up with some responses to those questions in one format or another. So, an hour went quickly. I want to thank everyone for attending and for your questions and comments. Want to thank again Kim Giuliotti, Greg Jacobson, Maggie Millard, Linda Vicaro for being here today. When all with a thumbs up or thumbs down, like it wasn't a mistake to let Maggie on here. I would say thumbs up.
No, thumbs down. Yeah.
Oh,
not a mistake. We're happy Maggie's here. I don't know what.
But, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and being part of the conversation here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Yeah, thanks to you.
We'll
Thanks,
see everyone. Next time.
Next time. It's a comment here. Before we end, from Michael. This was great. Make no mistake about it. LOL. He typed, and we are literally laughing out loud. So thank you for that, Michael. Thanks again, everyone.